All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here. I'm looking forward to talking to you today and then getting into some questions with Robbie. I'd like to begin by commending Robbie and his team for getting this very impressive group of thought leaders together to discuss the importance of working together to strengthen North American supply chain and our support of a low-carbon future. Now, Teck Resources, where I'm from, we have a very important role to play in this work, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to share some insights on that. But first, let me tell you a little bit about our company. We're a significant producer of critical minerals, particularly copper and zinc. We're based in Vancouver, British Columbia. We have operations in Canada, Chile, and here in the United States. And while we've been in the news lately about our upcoming sale of our steelmaking coal business and our focus on supplying essential metals, we're hardly new. Teck has long contributed to North America's supply chain, even going back as far as the days of Robert Oppenheimer. Our Trail operation today, which is one of the world's largest zinc and lead smelting and refining facilities, supplied heavy water for the Manhattan Project. And don't worry, I'm pretty sure that information is declassified by now. But over the years, of course, our role as part of the North American supply chain has grown and it's evolved. Today, Teck still plays an important role in support of national security as a key producer of germanium, which is used in fiber optics, semiconductors, and even night vision goggles. Trail has also been recycling electronics and lead-acid batteries for decades. And now we're advancing the development of a potential major new facility in British Columbia to recycle critical minerals used in lithium-ion batteries from electric vehicles. And this would be unique because there is no other EV battery recycling facility of that size anywhere else in Western US or Canada. And we think there's a big opportunity there for us to play a bigger role in the circular economy. It's still early days, but if that goes ahead, we have the potential to recycle up to 35,000 tons per year of battery material, comprised of materials including lithium, cobalt, and nickel. And that's the equivalent of recycling 140,000 EV batteries annually. We also operate the Red Dog mine in northwest Alaska, which is one of the largest zinc mines in the world and the largest critical minerals mine in the US, both in terms of quantity and value of the materials produced. Every year, Red Dog produces more than 500,000 metric tons of zinc in concentrate, which we refine in Trail and then supply to downstream customers, including across the US. But as significant as Trail and Red Dog are, the cornerstone of our growth as a major critical minerals champion is copper. We operate Canada's largest copper mine and just recently expanded our Quebrada Blanca operations in Chile, putting us on a path to become a top global copper producer. Beyond Highland Valley Copper and QB, we have a deep portfolio of attractive near and mid-term copper growth projects. They offer the potential to further double our copper production a second time before the end of the decade, and then double it again in the long term. Now, we have doubled down on copper because global trends make it clear that the world is going to need much, much more of it. I know there's some debate in the US about whether copper is or isn't a critical mineral. And without wading into any politics, which is always tricky in DC, of course, the fact is, I firmly believe there is no more critical metal for a low-carbon future than copper. We're on the cusp of a quantum leap in demand for copper. Estimates suggest that the global energy transition will require an additional 6.5 million metric tons in the next 10 years and 11.3 million tons annually by 2040. And the biggest driver of this is decarbonisation. And to illustrate this, consider just one aspect of this shift, electric vehicles. Each one needs as much as 176 pounds of copper, 4 times more than a traditional internal combustion engine. Last year, Americans bought over 1.4 million plug-in electric vehicles, which was an increase of over 50% from 2022. So that's almost 247 million pounds of copper from just EVs in just the United States in just 1 year. And again, that's only EVs. copper is also critical to wind turbines, solar panels, electrical infrastructure, public transit, and much, much more. And this is all very good news if you're an existing copper producer. But the coming spike in demand can also lead to problems. And as I said, I would stay out of politics, but you don't need to be political to look around and see that the geopolitical landscape has accelerated the need for resilient North American supply chains and trade. As a North American large-scale producer of strategic critical minerals with operations in stable jurisdictions, Teck is perfectly positioned to be a North American partner of choice for its US value chain partners. And we are committed to doing our part, working with governments on both sides of the 49th parallel. This means collaborating to ensure a strong, resilient supply chain that will be realized by working together to responsibly increase production of the resources, namely copper, that are critical to a low-carbon future. And the United States has a critical role to play in supplying the critical minerals the world needs. This country has tremendous resource wealth, and there is need to make permitting more efficient to unlock the full potential of domestic production. After all, what could be more secure than producing critical minerals right here in the US? And this includes our New Range project in northeastern Minnesota, which has the potential to produce copper, nickel, and platinum group metals to the highest environmental and social standards. And at the risk of wading even further into politics, there is a tremendous need for Canada and the US to work more closely together to secure supply chains and critical resources. And it starts with recognizing that our nations are stronger when we understand the existing business relationships and work to make them as efficient as possible. I believe we could do much more to ensure frictionless trade and efficient logistics across the border with both intermediate products and refined metals moving in both directions. This would more effectively and efficiently leverage the experience and installed capacity on either side of the border to benefit both our countries. So that's just a snapshot of Teck, our strategy for the future, and what we see as a tremendous and very important opportunity ahead of us all. So thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to Robbie's questions. That's assuming Robbie's coming, of course.
To join Jonathan in a fireside chat, please welcome back to the stage, Robbie Diamond.
Isn't it exciting that you sound so Canadian?
Thank you
run
very
the
much.
largest Canadian mining company.
I'm a booty Canadian, yeah.
I'm just trying to get over between all these accents today.
This is a global business, right?
Going from South Carolina to this is too much.
Sorry about that.
It seems like we talk a good talk. I don't know if we're walking a good walk when we talk about North American supply chains or even allied supply chains. What is your perspective? Are we really walking the walk, or are we just having a lot of talk?
Look, I think there's a lot more that we could be doing to walk the walk. I mentioned permitting. Clearly, that's a key area where, rather than having to be sourcing our critical minerals from farther afield, we could be supporting and promoting the development of projects here in North America. One of the key advantages we have, of course, is the sustainability and responsible mining practices that we use both in Canada and the US, which would ensure that the critical minerals that we produce are greener, they're cleaner, they're done with less environmental impact, and of course in partnerships with with First Nations to ensure communities share in the wealth creation from these opportunities. Unfortunately, permitting remains a very challenging process. It's a challenging process everywhere in the world, but it really requires some political will to support new projects. As I mentioned, we have a project opportunity here in northeastern Minnesota. That would be fantastic for North America, fantastic for the US if we were able to be producing significant quantities of copper, nickel, and platinum group metals here for use in the downstream supply chain. But right now, the preference seems to be to source them from farther afield. So I think that's an area, Robbie, where we're not yet walking the walk. As I mentioned as well, I think there's big opportunity for Canada and US to work in really close collaboration here to ensure that the the skills and experience we have on either side of the border are collectively utilized to meet the critical minerals needs that we have, rather than trying to, maybe if not deal in competition, at least deal with these things independently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sad to say you used the word political and will. Those two things don't go together. So, you talked about the skills. Canada has been a leader on Indigenous, bringing First Nations and First Peoples into this. What do you think other countries, United States and others, could learn about from Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about, our exports as a Canadian mining company, some of those exports are copper and zinc, but some of those exports are the highest standards in responsible mining. And I'll give you an example of when we have recently opened a new mine in Chile, our Quebrada Blanca mine. It's 300,000 tons of contained copper per annum. It's a big one. Before we even started pushing the project forward, we'd entered into 22 agreements with communities, Indigenous peoples and fishermen's unions. And those agreements ensured that we consulted extensively with all of those groups as we designed the project. So rather than doing all of our work and coming to them with a permit and saying, please approve, and by the way, hurry up, we worked with them throughout to make sure that their needs were incorporated, to make sure that their views were respected and reflected. And we were able to move then through the permitting process much more quickly and efficiently. So good for business, but good for relationships with communities. We also recognized in that region, the Atacama Desert is one of the driest places on Earth, a real scarcity of water. So we invested in a desalination plant and the pipelines to carry the water from that plant to our site. That was expensive, but again, important in that part of the world and for the sustainability of the operation. We also invested in PPAs to ensure that we would run our operations on 100% renewable power. So I think, whether it was with the communities, whether it was from an environmental perspective, we took all the right steps to ensure that we were welcome in the region, to ensure that we could set up a business that could operate successfully for the very long term. And that is the approach we take to everywhere we work. I mean, you mentioned in Indigenous relations, where we work at the Red Dog mine in Alaska. We've had a partnership there with the local Indigenous groups going back 40 years. It's been incredibly successful. More than 50% of our employees come from the NANA shareholder group. And again, that's an example of where you can, through long-term thinking and a commitment to being a responsible steward of the land, you can put in place great partnerships with benefit for all. And we would love to do the same in Minnesota. If we could establish similar relations there and hold ourselves to account to operate to the highest standards, that's exactly what we will do.
Well, just as an example from last year, I don't know if people were here, we had the premier from Saskatchewan here. And afterwards, we started getting calls from the chiefs of all the tribes there and of the First Peoples, and they wanted to come to Washington. They went to the Pentagon and they went to the White House. They came to our office, and what they had to say was, it's not that we just wanted to be standing on the stage with the premier at that time. We too want to sell our resources, but we feel that we deserve an equal voice in the selling of those resources. So I just thought that was really interesting. It wasn't to stop it. It was really to be at the front end. That's not to say anything against the premier. It just is but no, I think it's very reflective of what's needed. It's
a great example. We have an undeveloped copper resource in British Columbia called Galore Creek, and again have worked very closely with the Tahltan Nation in that area. And at many resource-related conferences, they will be speaking up on behalf of the project. It's as important to them as it is to us. So, done well, these relationships can be very powerful.
So, more and more in the last weeks, even, forget months, you hear more mining companies, both the juniors, but then the larger companies talking about standards, talking about how competing with China is very difficult. We've heard it over and over again here. And that they're willing to really dig in, I think, to that type of standards. So number one is, do you think there's been a sea change in the community due to this need? And then two is, are we ever going to be able to compete, or is the market just rigged? And will there ever be, let me actually maybe ask it this way, we talk about a premium price on green minerals or a premium price on a mineral with higher standards in one category or another. Do you think anyone's ever going to be willing to pay that? Because many people come to our office and say, I just want the cheapest thing in the end.
So there were a lot of questions in that, Robbie.
Yeah,
I'll try and remember the first
I want
one.
to give you to talk about whatever you want.
Yeah, thank you. I think expectations have changed significantly, and it's the expectations of communities and governments with respect to the mining companies that they host, again, particularly in North America, and we fully intend to meet those expectations. The challenge we have is to mine more material than we've ever mined previously, but do that more responsibly with less impact to land than we've ever done previously. One of the things at Teck we've signed up to is to be nature positive by 2030, meaning that for every 1 hectare of land that we disturb through our activities, we will conserve or rehabilitate 3 hectares of land. And we're very committed. We've already invested in 52,000 hectares of conservation projects to enable us moving in that direction, and are innovating the way we mine and the way that we reclaim our operations. And I think this is an area where we can compete and outcompete is on standards, because it's all very well to have mining companies come into your region and develop mines quickly, but the damage that they do can last for generations if not done well. And I believe increasingly that the standards by which we perform will be a competitive advantage. They will give us access to more opportunities because communities can rely on us to do the right thing. They will also allow us to operate our businesses in a more resilient fashion. You see, when mining companies and operators don't behave well with respect to the communities, they will be subject to protests and shutdowns and a whole variety of actions that can impact their business. So I think standards is an area that will provide more opportunity and will provide a more resilient supply chain ultimately. To your final point on the market, we have entered into, albeit a small number of contracts, where we're now able to achieve a green premium for our product. So there's a verification system called the copper mark, which is a subset of that called the zinc mark. All of our operations are now certified under either the copper mark or the zinc mark, and they reflect a basically third-party assured process that shows that we operate by the highest standards, that we have a low carbon footprint. And we're starting to see the green shoots of us getting paid for that. Now, that's in its infancy at the moment, but my preference on this is always to let the market decide how these things should be compensated for. Ultimately, the OEMs in our industry, who in many cases in the auto industry are the end consumers of many of the metals here, should be demanding of their supply chain the highest standards in terms of environmental performance. We need, of course, to trace and track that performance through the supply chain, but the OEMs should then be prepared to pay for that, so they can say to their customers, the people in this room who drive vehicles, that this is an electric car and it's truly a green car. There's no point producing an electric vehicle which is made with, let's say, dirty nickel, as is a topical subject at the moment. You need green nickel. You need sustainably and responsibly produced metals to ensure that these vehicles are ultimately achieving what we're trying to do, which is wide-scale decarbonisation of the environment.
I think that's where we probably need the allied nations to step up, because I do think consumers over time have not shown their willingness all the time to pay, at least the mass amount of consumers to pay for it. And so I think we need to find a way to distinguish the price on a market, and maybe the markets that we have now where those prices are discovered, and the transparency of discovering price. It's just so not only is the supply chain opaque, but also the pricing mechanisms opaque in some of these smaller materials.
Yes, but I think today in contract negotiations between miners and downstream producers, we already reflect quality differences in products through penalties or discounts or premia paid for those differences in quality. We could do exactly the same with respect to the environmental standards by which those metals were produced, provided we have consistent standards and we have audited performance against those standards. Then it makes it possible to say, well, you should pay X for this, and we can establish the market by which that is done.
So my last question is, I believe copper is incredibly important. It's not on our critical minerals list. I think that there's political reasons for that. That's my view. You don't have to answer that. It's in places that are politically difficult, whether Alaska, Minnesota, Arizona. I guess my sense is it a big problem that copper is not on the list, and how important is copper to our future?
So to start with the last part of your question, copper is incredibly important to our future. For example, there's a lot of discussion around battery technology. What's going to be the required minerals for batteries? Is it going to be lithium? Is it going to be cobalt? Is it going to be nickel? Are they going to be steady state batteries? Solid state batteries, sorry. How is this going to work? Copper is agnostic to all of that. It doesn't matter what the winning battery technology is. Ultimately, we're going to need to move around a lot more electrons than we do today. So under almost any scenario you can imagine, the demand growth for copper is extremely high, and it's very, very hard today to see where that copper is going to come from, because there simply aren't enough resources that have been discovered or projects that are in development to meet supply and demand. So there's an urgency required in the development of new copper projects. Should it be a critical mineral in the US? Absolutely. I think it should be a critical mineral everywhere. And I think it would be of benefit if major governments, like Canada and the US, for example, would agree which critical minerals they have on their list, because then that incentivizes investment on both sides of the border in the same minerals, and we can encourage that free flow of trade from one side of the border to the other.
We did a webinar called Listomania, and I went through all the lists, and now every country and every agency in the United States, we can't even agree as a country on which are the critical minerals, let alone between countries. So we called it Listomania after the rock song, and I think I agree with you. Maybe that's the one thing we can find some agreement on. Anyways, thank you so much, Jonathan, for doing this, and we appreciate it and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.